let's do the formal report setup now and create just an awesome report. I mean, in the process, make it really cool. You have different components to it. A lot of, especially on the formal report, you have what we call the front matter. Books have a front matter too as you go through. So your formal report, you choose a professional binder or cover. You want it really sharp because this is a formal report. You want to sit down, put the name of the report in caps, the receiver's name, title, organization, the author's name, title, organization, the date submitted. All that goes in the cover and on the title page as you go through. The title page is a little bit more formal. The cover one just has the outside material as you go through, and it depends. Sometimes there'll be a specific format they're looking for as you go through. You want to always have, on a formal report, have a letter of transmittal or a memo of transmittal as you go through. Announce the topic, explain what you're responding to, briefly describe it, highlight the findings, conclusions, recommendations. Because surprisingly, you may have a 50-page document, and guess what? Not everybody reads them. Don't tell anybody. Okay, they only read the beginning, like the front matter and maybe an executive summary, and then maybe one or two sections that interest them. All that work you did, not everybody reads it. I'm sorry to tell you that, but you better do it, because just in case they do, you may lose $1 million contract because you got sloppy on page 39 and somebody actually read it for once. So that being said, you want to have a close appreciation for those that sat down there and helped you with it, follow-up actions that need to be done, table of contents that really help to show a page number. A table of contents puts people back and they realize how big and how thorough your document really is. If you have a lot of illustrations in it, really include that in there. The reason why is because people like illustrations. They like graphs. They like different designs of graphs. Pie chart, bar chart, a linear line chart as you go through. Different aspects of it. Have a flow chart, whatever you can, and put a couple of visuals as you go through on top of that. Those all help, and you also list them in the illustrations, because people will sit down and you'll be able to drive people through your report by saying, here's the illustrations, and they'll focus in on those maybe more than any other part of your report. So as you go through executive summary, it should be one page as you go through, have critical words in the process, and have an outline with the headings, all that, conclusions, recommendations right there in the executive summary. You want it brief, you want it to the point. That's why it's called a summary in the process. Fill in your outline as you go through. The purpose of this report is, and it's got to be fast, it's got to be quick, and it should summarize the entire report in one page. Sometimes on giant reports, maybe it's a page and a half or two. You go past two, it's no longer executive summary. It's nothing more than additional blathering, and you don't want to have that impression to somebody else that you spent all this time in to prepare this report in the process. Introduction, describe the event as you go through, why it's important, define the scope as you go through, look on the sources that you have. So introduction is kind of the setup for the whole document. Sometimes people will skim over it, but you really want to clarify the scope, because people ask questions about it, and if they don't read the introduction, they may be looking for something else. So the introduction really plays a big role. Present your research finding or solution to the initial problem right away in the body. Discuss, analyze, interpret the logical segments. Use good headings, because you spend a lot of time on a formal report. The headings play a big role. Don't let anything slop over on your headings. Have a clear, concise heading with enough spacing after it, and a couple spaces underneath it, a couple spaces above it. Make certain that heading stands out so people can find it quickly and know what it's about in the process. Instead of just a 12-pitch font, make it a 14-pitch font, because you want people to see the headings, and use clear, and I prefer, instead of functional headings, descriptive headings as you go through. On the findings, a finding is actually a section of the report. Explain what the findings, what you found out in relation to the report. And then from the findings, you draw conclusions. Don't conclude, here's what I found, then you have a whole list, and then you conclude something based upon the findings. Based upon the findings, we believe that overall, the 14% decrease in sales, that you list them separately because they're separate topics as you go through. On recommendations, make certain whatever you do, if it's outrageously expensive, make certain they understand the total cost. Make it practical, reasonable, feasible, and ethical. Don't have people question recommendations. Question it yourself before you give it to them, and make certain it falls within lines. If it costs $1.3 million and your budget's $200,000, your recommendation is not going to fly. It just isn't going to do it. So make certain it's practical. You may want to say, even though the preferred method would be 1.2 million, we believe that this will address most of the problem, and have something that's going to actually work instead of something that's fanciful in the process. Enumerated list of recommendations, by the way, points 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are a big deal, and I recommend them because of the fact on a recommendation, you want to be very linear in your pathway. This recommendation, we recommend doing this one first, this one second, this one third, in this order. That helps the reader to know what the priorities that you found out in your formal report are all about. The back matter is the appendix. Sometimes the appendix is really a critical part. Usually it's just stuff you come across and you put in the back of the folder. You may have a 150-page paper, and 75 pages or more is appendix. They're just research material, just in case somebody has a question about what you studied and everything else. You can refer back to section A, section B, section C in the appendix, and then go back and see the hard work that you did. It's kind of like patting yourself on the back because nobody else does. So that being said, include the survey forms so you can see the type of detail that you did, other reports, tables, large graphics, correspondence you received. All of those really help support the overall front section of your report as you go through. Your last section really is about your works cited. You want to use the MLA, okay, or the APA style as you go through. And if you want to really have a very major paper that's very formal, include a bibliography as you go through in the process. So your final writing tips: make certain you allow sufficient time. Collect the data before beginning to write. I've done the opposite before. I'm writing, and then I come across data, and then I have to go back and revise what I wrote when I should have done the data and the research beforehand. So research. When you're comfortable, then you start writing as you go through, and create a good outline. Now, the way I do an outline, I do 4x6 cards. I got painter's tape. I stick them on a piece of glass, and I sit down and I put them all on pretty much the piece of glass. And then I can sit down on my outline and rearrange it in the order that I think the final one should really look good in the process. Provide a good writing environment. If you're going to spend a lot of time writing, if you're anywhere from a 6 to 14-hour job writing or longer, okay, you need to make sure you create an environment that's easy to drop into, write, and then leave as you go through the process. Use your computer features wisely as you go through. Write, in my opinion, write rapidly and revise later. Some people like to sit down there and revise on the spot to get a perfect paper. Not me. My preference is to sit down and get it on paper and then go back and edit it after, because then it can also tweak the ideas besides just the editing component as you go through. Save different sections until you have gained confidence. Use verb tenses consistency. Now, to be honest, I've struggled with this in the past. Sometimes I would mix my verb tenses or my voices as you go through. Make certain you're consistent. Remember, in business, we use the active voice, okay? And usually it's almost always the present tense as you go through. And avoid the ing words and the ly words. It's going to help you an awful lot. You really want to avoid the first person, I this, I that, I this, I that, or we in the process. You want to make sure you avoid those things and let the first draft sit. Ideally, if it's a simple paper, it sits overnight. Sometimes I let drafts sit a week if it's a big giant paper, and then go back and address it. Other times, I've actually gone through, created an extensive writing, and then I read it. I read it forward so many times I get bored. I read it backwards. I start reading the back page, and then the second from back page, and so on. Whatever it takes to keep your brain jarred, to sit down and look for typos you may have in there, and then revise. On major papers that you want to have published or make a big splash, I've gone through and edited 7 passages all the way through. Proofread the copy at least 3 times for your final copy before you're all done. So a formal report setup: cover, title page, table of contents, executive summary, your front matter in the process, your introduction, body, conclusions, recommendations, and finally your back matter, the appendix. That really makes a really sharp report by the time you're all done. Take care.